Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gerardo Poli.
And this, sorry. Okay.
I'm Gerardo Poli.
I'm Hubert Hemstra, and this is the Vet Vault. Before we introduce today's guest, just a reminder that if you want to see a recap of some of the best bits of each episode, or if you want to refer to any of the books or resources that we talk about to our guests, you can check them out at thevetvault.com and clicking on the show notes. And if you know anyone who you think might find value in what we discussed, then send them a link to the episode and help us spread the love.
Now, if you're anything like me, you might have some preconceptions about surgery and surgeons. Our guest this episode, Dr. Bronwyn Fullagar, will flip those ideas of yours on their heads. Bronwyn is a board-certified specialist surgeon who has a different take on what it means and what it takes to be a surgeon. When there is not a global viral pandemic, she travels the world as a locum surgeon, and in between work stints, she shares her skills at several charity organizations in some pretty awesome locations.
We dig deep into a career in surgery, what it takes, what it looks like, the good and the bad, including some practical advice on how to become a surgeon. She gives us her tips on how to stop post-op panic about things going wrong with your cases. And she shares with us about finding her passion, loving the journey, picking your mentors, how working in the US compares to a career in Australia, and much, much more. Please enjoy Dr. Bronwyn Fullagar. Bronwyn, welcome to the Vet Vault. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I am going to start straight away just to get to know.
To cut me off.
Do what?
To cut me off first. You're gonna jump in straight away.
Yes, to stop Gerard from saying anything, because once he starts, you can't shut him up. We'll start with our new question just to get to know you a little bit about. I said to Gerardo, I saw a billboard the other day that all it said is, "Bad decisions lead to good stories." And I love that. It kept me thinking for ages. So I want to know, do you agree with that? And if you agree, have you got any examples?
Yeah, I think it's a great quote. And I think as a veterinarian, and particularly as a surgeon, we have ample opportunity to make bad decisions. And then if we're lucky later on, they become a good story that we can laugh about later on. So I definitely agree. And yeah, I thought a lot about what example to use. I would say that most of my funnier examples happened as a new grad, which I think is maybe true for most people. And my first job was in a mixed animal practice in North Queensland. And people who know me now probably couldn't imagine me doing cattle or camel medicine, which is what I tended to do a lot of there. But I think my worst set of decisions leading to what now hopefully is a good story was one of my first weekends on call at Easter time. So it was Easter, and to set the scene a little bit, I'd been in practice for about 6 weeks or so, very green, and our clinic was on call for a radius of about 3-hour drive from its location, and I was the sole mixed animal practitioner on call for that radius for the 4-day Easter long weekend. And the series of cases that I received was pretty much every new graduate's nightmare. There was, I can still remember some of them. There was a cat in status epilepticus that I could not get to stop having seizures. There was a snake bite, a colic, some sort of foreign body surgery. And then on about, I think it was Saturday or Sunday evening, I'd been going pretty much flat out for 36 or 48 hours. And one of the clients called and said, I've had another weaner die. We've had these weaners die for months, and my boss had told him that the next time a weaner died, didn't matter what time it was, we were going to go out and do a post-mortem on it. And it didn't seem like an emergency to me since the weaner had already passed away, but it seemed like the client and really felt like it needed to be seen right then and there. So I thought I'd better go and do this. So I grabbed a snack and put on my coveralls, and it was hot and sticky in North Queensland. And I went out and spent several hours doing what I thought was a very thorough post-mortem exam on this wiener, collecting all kinds of specimens in small bottles. And I even got the brain out, so proud of myself. And by the time I'd finished this, it was, and I'd been using my car headlights to kind of light my postmortem. And so I was covered in slime and goo and all kinds of cow entrails, and it was hot. You can imagine the smell was pretty bad. And before the property owner or the farmer left, I said, "Oh, just hang on a sec. Before you go, I just want to check that my car will start because the headlights have been on for a really long time." So I put my hand through the open window of my car and turned the key in the ignition. Obviously, terribly bad decision, as you'll find out. So the car proceeded to, I'm not entirely sure of the details, it's all a bit of a blur, but essentially the car proceeded to drive away by itself. And I started to chase the car. Also, terrible decision. Never try and stop a moving car with your body. But chased the car and was attempting to, I think, jump through the window to grab the handbrake to try and save my beloved Subaru from a certain demise. And didn't see a tree because it was dark, and the tree kind of came up alongside the car, and I got squished between the car and the tree. So, the car proceeded to go and total itself. Fortunately, didn't hit anybody, but certainly landed up in a ditch. And I was in a pretty critical condition.
Oh, really? Oh, that's less funny. The story suddenly took a dark turn there.
Yeah. So not terribly funny at the time, but I definitely, ambulances were called, and I landed up in the local hospital. And I think that, in the end, obviously everything turned out okay, but I think the more entertaining parts of the story were that when I, having lain on the ground for 45 minutes waiting for the ambulance to arrive and then being assessed, and I was in the ambulance driving 45 minutes back to the main town, the on-call phone proceeded to ring. And I was like, somebody has to answer that, answer it. And here I am in an ambulance, and so the paramedic answered the phone, and more calls kept coming in. It was a goat that was having trouble breathing, and I was like, you'll have to call my boss. Keep fielding these calls. So I got to the hospital and was obviously covered. I was wearing overalls, which by this stage were covered in blood and all kinds of.
Your own blood.
No, the cow's blood.
Oh, okay.
So I was being wheeled in on the gurney, and it was sort of like a scene from ER. Everyone rushes down. It's like, she's covered in blood. Cut the overalls off, and like big scissors and like cut them off. It's not my blood. Anyway, so I guess bad decision, bad outcome, except for the fact that I made it. And I think the moral of the story was to, apart from the obvious of not trying to run after cars and never operate your car from outside the vehicle, that I think the other take home is, if you've been up for 36 hours, know yourself well enough and set some boundaries for yourself and sort of be able to say no, yes. And because no animal emergency is worth risking your own life over. And so I think, many people have been in, similar situations maybe.
How long ago was this, Bronwyn?
Oh, it was my first year of practice. So
yeah, but you look very young. I've got no idea.
Oh, it was probably in 2008.
2008. So we're 12 years ago. And I love how much detail you like the fact that you can remember all the other cases you saw on the weekend.
Oh, it's like one of those.
It clearly was a very traumatizing time.
Seared into my memory that whole weekend. Yeah, and I think my poor boss and my parents, who had to go through all the angst of dealing with that. But fortunately, in the end, it was a good.
It's a good story, but
now, right?
Fine.
Apart from 17 titanium implants and still fragments of tree in your thigh or something. So that's how that was the start of, that's the start of your journey through mixed practice, and then the end of your journey in mixed practice to in one weekend. But where did you transition from there? You stayed out for a bit longer, and then where did you go from there? Because what is it you do now?
Question,
maybe you might be
recovered at home, and then at the hospital and at home, and then I purchased another Subaru, and I drove it back to the practice and proceeded to work there for another couple of years. And the story kind of became local folklore amongst the farmers. You're that vet that ran over herself with her car, blah, blah, blah. But no, since then, so what I do now is I'm a specialist small animal surgeon based in Canada, and I work primarily as a locum surgeon, so a relief surgeon. And pre-COVID, I traveled a lot for work. So I traveled between the US, Canada, Australia, and was going to do some work in New Zealand, but things have changed a little with the pandemic. And then on the side, or in the times that I'm not in the clinic, I do some public speaking and educational work in surgery. And I do some, I try to do each year some charity or volunteer work with some of the worldwide, vet charity organizations as well.
Wow. That's the coolest job setup I've heard of in a long time. That's really awesome. So you're a specialist surgeon, Bronwyn. That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So talk us through the journey from cow vet to globe-trotting specialist surgeon. That's incredible.
Yeah. So I after a couple of years in mixed practice, I finally listened to myself a little bit and realized that my passion and what I really looked forward to in work was the small animal side of things rather than the farm animal and the horses as much. So I first embarked on sort of the rite of passage of every Australian veterinarian by going to the UK and actually working as a locum there in small practice for a couple of years, and did some traveling and, really great experience, lots of, fun adventures. And then sort of was at a crossroads where I thought, I want to do more with my job and make sort of more of an impact. And I've always kind of had this idea that I'd like to work in North America and specialize. And I thought I'll just check it out and see, what's involved in that. So I did a lot of reconnaissance work, trying to work out how one goes from an Australian veterinarian from a non-accredited school through to the US system. And being a locum in the UK allowed me to take some time to travel to North America to do some externships and trips around various schools.
So I'm just going to interrupt. So how many years out of uni are we now in this part of the story? About roughly
3 to 4.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah, so not a long time, but a little bit different to what sometimes people say that, you need to do an internship straight away. So I kind of, sort of went back and did an internship. So applied through the match and matched to a practice in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I guess it does help that I'm a Canadian citizen. So that kind of was a foot in the door somewhat. And I knew that if I could get an internship in either Canada or the States and do the rotating internship, then I'd have a better chance of being a candidate for a residency of some kind in North America. And also, Canada and Calgary appealed to me because I love the mountains and it seemed like a cool sort of adventurous place to go. So did an internship there and then went through the match again the next year and was really fortunate to match to a residency at Ohio State, so in surgery. So then I traveled to Columbus, Ohio for 3 years and I did a surgical residency, and then after that made the move back to Calgary to start work as a specialist.
So that decision to make the jump to actually doing a residency and specializing, that's a big decision. Now I'm going to interrupt myself there because when you were telling the story of the Subaru, I did actually think that when you were saying the bit about lying in the ambulance and still being concerned about the phone ringing, you clearly are a committed, driven sort of a person. Most people when you're bleeding out in an ambulance, you stop worrying about sick goats and stuff like that. But not Bronwyn. Are you very driven?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that I'm very driven, and for a long time I had pretty big long-term goals about where I wanted to land up, and like many others have reflected, some of those goals have worked out the way that I had hoped, and some of them have worked out in completely unexpected ways. But definitely once I had decided that I wanted to specialize in something, then I sort of set my mind to it and put lots of time and effort into kind of taking all the steps that I could to try and make it happen. The decision to specialize, I think for me, it was a couple of things. I wanted to be able to make, to be an expert in one particular field, to be a person that could help others, with cases or to get better, to be kind of a go-to person, and to understand better how things work. I think, and the more you learn about, medicine or surgery, you kind of go down the rabbit hole into, physiology and biomechanics, and then it becomes more and more and more interesting the more that you know. At least it did for me. And so, I'd see these people who were specialists, and they weren't just smart and good at whatever they were specialized in. They were just all round smart, interesting people who seemed to be top of their game and things. And I think the other thing, like, why people ask, why surgery? And I think for me, surgery, maybe this is not its reputation, but I think the reality of surgery is that you have to kind of do a bit of everything. Like, you have to know about every organ system. You have to liaise with all the different specialties in the hospital. You have to understand cardiology and endocrinology and, internal medicine and oncology and all those sorts of things in order to do surgery. And so I felt like it was a happy medium of not sort of giving up on all the rest of the body systems, and at the same time still getting to do surgery, which itself is really fun. Like, I couldn't imagine my career without doing a skill like surgery. So I kind of fell into it that way. And I think in terms of, helping people around the world and volunteering in other countries, which is something that I wanted to do for a long time, I feel like a surgeon is in demand everywhere. It's like, we talk about vet medicine being an essential service, and within vet medicine, surgery is an essential service. We all need to know how to do it to some extent, or have somebody, there to do it. And so I felt like it was a versatile specialty if I was going to, live in either Australia or North America. There'd be options. So
when it came to specialty for you and being the expert, was it sounded like was it like progressive mastery? Like, it's kind of like you had an interest in it and you dived into it, and then the more you dived into it, the more rewarding it was. So, and like that journey pursuit for mastery over something, was that the drive behind it? And like, some people kind of dance around and become jack of all trades, right? But then they don't necessarily want to spend and invest the time in one particular area because they feel like they're going to miss out, some kind of fear of missing out, right? If I do this, then I won't ever get to do that ever again. But what it sounds like to me, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the joy that you got from diving deep into one particular area, was it around kind of mastery and skill and expertise?
Yeah, and mastery not only of the physical skill of doing surgery, but I guess I'm speaking only for myself here, not for all surgeons, but I guess I like the thinking part of surgery as well. I like the practical, logical decision-making side of it. And yeah, in general mixed practice, I definitely felt like I was okay at a lot of things, but for my particular personality and interests and things, I would rather be better at one area of that. And I think a common worry about, people when they decide to specialize is, but I'll never get to do X, Y, and Z again. And I wouldn't say that I really miss the things that I don't get to do. And I think if you asked, say, an ophthalmologist, do they miss, I don't know, treating the hind legs? They'd probably say no. I mean, the eyes are so fascinating, but no, I don't miss it. The knees.
Yeah.
I love your take on surgery, because you're right. There is so I certainly have a preconception about surgery being a very narrow chop, chop, chop. I don't care about anything else. I just want to be in. Don't be offended. It's just, it's obviously an exaggerated way of saying it, but you do think, all right, all the other guys do everything else. I just stand in my little theater with my scalpel blade, and the animal comes in and I slice it and then say, okay, handball, back to you, not my problem anymore. But the way you describe it does sound a hell of a lot more appealing. I've never been drawn to surgery as such. I can take it or leave it. But when you describe it that way, it does sound much nicer.
Yeah, I think I had that same preconception about surgery as a vet student, and I always enjoyed it, but I always thought, I don't want to be that person nobody asks, difficult thinking questions. They only want you to do the sort of tradesperson part of surgery. when I did my internship, I was exposed to some, great surgeons. And I sort of vividly remember one day when there'd been a septic abdomen. So I can't remember the exact details, but some sort of intestinal dehiscence, and the surgeon had gone in and done a resection and anastomosis. And then she was there the next day kind of modulating the post-operative care of this septic patient. And it's quite complicated. Obviously, there's drains and fluid balances and, various different prokinetic medications. And you're thinking about, systemic inflammatory response and all this kind of stuff. And I was the intern standing there just in awe, like, this is what surgeons do? Like, amazing. Like, I saw the surgery yesterday. That was great. And now, you get to treat this patient, you get to treat the whole patient. And I think, I'm very much biased towards soft tissue surgery, I think, for that reason. But, I love being in the OR, but I also like, the thinking, the sort of practical thinking side of surgery.
But you said something before, and actually, now you just highlighted it again. That's what you saw, right? You saw that kind of vision, or that type of surgeon that was not just, what everyone thinks surgeons do, which is literally kind of stand next to the theater, scrub, get into a theater, and then stand just a little bit out of the theater, change scrub, and someone feeds him like a patient after patient, right? But what you saw was this holistic surgeon, and you saw all aspects of it, right? So I don't know, like, to me, it sounded like as if that image that you not necessarily held on to that, but that's kind of the standard that you were actually wanting to achieve for yourself.
I was going to ask the same question, because I think it does come down to your teachers and your mentors. I think if there's any South African vets of my generation listening to this, I think we can all imagine one of the head surgeons at our uni, and he was not like that. He was the surgeon who you ask him a post-op question and like, I don't care, go ask the medicine guys. He was a technician. He wasn't actually a doctor.
I think there are surgeons out there who really enjoy, like, the thing that they love most about surgery is the technical aspect. And I think, maybe I'm generalizing, but I think people who really, really love orthopedics, that's definitely a very, very technical mastery. But I think the American system too, like, one of the reasons that I wanted to specialize in the States at the time that I did was because in the American system, there is this focus on, and I can't comment on Australian specialization because of course I didn't do it, but at least what I saw when I visited these US universities and saw the surgery residents and what they were doing, I was like, I want to be a surgery resident. Like, this just looks like, the greatest thing. And obviously, it's really hard as well, but I like clients, and, I like that side of vet too. So maybe I'm an unusual surgeon, but that's what I like about it.
I think you are an unusual surgeon, but it's good it's good to know that you can be that kind of surgeon. I think that's the point of it. Gee?
The other thing which you said before, and Hubert said the word mentor, which was where I was going to head with that, was that you said that you worked under surgeons, or you spent time with surgeons, right, who were balanced. Not saying that there are surgeons out there, like, there are vets out there unbalanced, it's just that, but it's kind of like you picked your mentors. Some people look for the mentor who is clinically the best at something, right? Some people, and that's what they do, or that's what they want to be like. But then that's the common downfall, I feel, if people don't select properly when they're selecting mentors, is that if you get the clinical guru, right, but then it's not well balanced, then you turn into that kind of person, right? And that could be fine if that's what you want to be. But then you should also, considering mentors and picking your mentors, look at the other aspects of their life. Look at the other aspects of how they treat the teams and so forth. This is with any kind of mentor, right? There should be more thought going into selecting mentor, not just, hey, this person is the best of the best of this, and I want to do that. But then you've got to decide whether or not you want to be almost the same as every other aspect in their life, because over time it will impart and it will rub. So it's just an observation there what you said before, but you talked about well-balanced mentors. You talked about the thing that wanted to see and the image that you had, and that was really cool for you, and it was just really cool to hear.
Yeah, I think I was really fortunate in my residency to have several really, really good mentors who kind of epitomized, being excellent surgeons, like, really, really top technical surgeons, but also promoted really excellent post-operative care, and they were good teachers, and they were kind. They were just nice. They were friendly and kind people. And I think I had some preconceptions, and maybe, surgery is stressful. And so, it can be easy as a surgeon when you're having a stressful day to seem intimidating, I think. And I think, some people are intimidating, but I think you don't have to be. So I guess I was fortunate to sort of work under some surgeons who managed to be, excellent surgeons, but also be great people to work with as well. So
that's a tricky one, because it is to some degree a little bit of luck of the draw, because if where you ended up doing your residency, you had by default good teachers and mentors. But then I agree completely with what Gerardo says. I'm trying to think, how do you put that into practical terms? It might be going into who you learn from with a very clear set mindset of what I want to learn from this person, and then picking multiple mentors. So you might end up in a surgical residency, and you've got technically the best surgeon in the world, but you don't want to be that person. It's to go, well, let me learn surgery from him, but I'm going to pick somebody else in the hospital who I want to model in terms of how to be and how to grow, and mindset. So it's maybe being. I heard another. I think it was on another podcast, and it came to it was with the guy who wrote The Rich Dad Poor Dad, and his one lesson. They asked him if you could leave only one lesson. He said his one lesson to people is pick your teachers. Yeah,
I think the idea of learning different things from different people is really important. And one of my resident mates actually pointed that out to me. I was struggling in my first year of residency. I think a lot of people do. It was a big culture shock to move to the States, and it was a very fast-paced and pretty demanding program. And I was getting quite stressed about things, and there's lots of different personalities, and some of them you work super well with, and some of them, for whatever reason, you're just not super well matched. But my resident mate said exactly that. He's like, when you're with, pick what you want to learn from each person and just focus on that. Focus on why you're here, and that advice definitely helped me quite a lot.
No, that's awesome. It's like being deliberate around what your choice and why.
There's those hard times where during certain stages of your residency, what was because it's a big thing, it's a big daunting thing. I think all vets, or most of us, at some point go, should I specialize? And I think for many of us, the absolute enormity of it and the overwhelming amount of time and effort that it takes just seems too big a mountain to cross. Was it as hard as you thought? What were the hardest parts? What were the biggest challenges that you faced during your journey to being super surgeon?
Oh, I wish I was a super surgeon. That'd be awesome. I think some of the hardest, I thought a lot about, I've thought a lot about this, and definitely the residency itself, I think most people would say it's really hard. It's physically hard. It's mentally draining. It really stretches the limits of your mental fortitude, in terms of you're expected to often work on quite low amounts of sleep, and there are a lot of demands placed on you, and you hold a lot of responsibility in the hospital. So, if things don't go well, you're the first person that needs to kind of be there to be responsible for that. The residency was, as challenging as I had expected for a lot of different reasons. But I think the times that I found the toughest, it's been less about the actual work and more about what's going on inside my own head, trying to make the decisions. And you said to me, how did I make these decisions? It really wasn't easy. And, to do a residency, you're definitely committing 3 or 4 years or more of your life, often in your 20s, to doing it. So you have to, one, really have the end goal in mind, and you have to, two, actually want to be a resident, which fortunately I did. Like, I liked the learning, and we got sort of grilled a lot as residents. It was very structured, and we were expected to know things, and we would be questioned on them all the time. And it prepared us really well for boards, but it can also be quite stressful if you don't like having people quiz you all the time. But I learned, for the most part, I like that kind of learning style. I liked the structure, and I liked that. So, but I think the decision to do a residency, particularly one that's in a foreign country, is really hard.
I don't think I've ever heard someone say that you have to decide, like you have to want to be a resident.
Yeah, you've got to like it. That's gold. I really like that.
That's super. That's super cool.
That comes back to what we've talked about before, about people saying it's not about the end goal, it's about struggling well. So the residency is going to be a struggle, but if you just focused on, I just want to get through this and be a specialist, you're going to be unhappy for that whole time instead of saying, this is great in itself.
I think I definitely started out with, it's only 3 years. You can survive anything for 3 years. Just get the letters after your name. And then, by sort of the end of the first year, I was like, this isn't working. I've got to embrace this residency thing a bit more. And then things definitely improved when I sort of, enjoyed the journey a little bit more. And I think it was Rob Webster, one of the other specialists that I listened to on the podcast, said, the fleeting joy of achieving the letters after your name. I mean, it's brilliant he said 2 or 3 hours. I would say 2 or 3 weeks, like definitely felt pretty good. But you've got to be doing it for more than just that day.
Yeah, and I could take that back for myself as far as vet school, in terms of what I did wrong. Because you just look forward to that graduation day, to that day of your last exam. I fantasized it for years. And it is disappointing. I distinctly remember finishing that last oral going, I'm done, I'm so happy. And then going, fuck, I've got a headache and I'm tired, I'm going to have a nap. That was literally the extent of it. I was picturing wild parties, and there were some wild parties, but first there was just a little bit of, oh, well, that was it. It's over. And not actually focusing enough on enjoying the journey and making the most of where you are at the time.
I love the quote, what is it? It's not just a destination, it's a journey, right? And when I was going through vet school, I was like, oh, so the journey, I missed out on the journey, which was partying and having fun and drinking and so my interpretation of that, Jesus, kind of 10, 15 years ago, right, was that actually I should have had more fun. But then now I reflect, I'm like, I should have just loved it, like I should just, the opportunities that I had, the people that I met, the things that we did, the stuff that I learned, like that was honoring and enjoying the journey, not necessarily what I thought it was, which was drinking and partying and stuff, right? Because I didn't do enough of that, that's for sure.
I think there's both. I certainly had a good time in vet school. Definitely enjoyed that journey quite a lot. And I think in Columbus, what really saved me in my residency was actually starting to enjoy Columbus, the place, a little bit more. So finding some friends outside of the vet school, I joined a running club and they became a really close group of friends. And then I had a reason to be there as well. I was like, oh, I can't wait for Thursday afternoon. I'm going to go to running club. I'm here. I'm actually enjoying life here a little bit more. And that was super helpful. But yeah, definitely residencies are hard. So I think, you need to want to do it. And I know people that have started a residency and then decided not to finish that one and picked a different specialty, or decided not to do a residency at all, or they've finished their residency and decided not to be a clinical specialist. Like all these journeys are fine, but I think ultimately, wanting to do it pretty strongly is kind of a prerequisite.
Bronwyn, you said before that you fly around, flying specialist surgeon.
Right.
What are the things that are different between Australia, Canada, and US, or how do you adapt?
Yeah, I think adaptability is the key word. If you're going to be any sort of locum, you need to be open-minded and adaptable. But I think there's not that. I was actually surprised when I returned to Australia after working in the States and Canada for a number of years as a specialist, how similar it actually is. So I think the biggest difference is there's not that much difference in the standard of care, I would say. I think Australian, referral hospitals do a really good job. There tend to be, I think, more smaller specialty hospitals perhaps in Australia with fewer types of specialists in each compared to North America. Because it's more corporate, I think, in North America, there are more hospitals that have kind of more of a full complement of specialists, particularly within the internal medicine side of things. So they might have a neurologist and an oncologist and an internal medicine and a cardiologist, whereas in Australia, your internal medicine department might kind of encompass all of those things. And then more people, I think, overall have insurance, at least in Canada. More pet owners have pet insurance, which as a specialist obviously makes a huge difference to the level of care that you can provide.
Yeah.
I think the coffee is definitely better in Australia, like really
100%.
so much better. Like, you know, best part about locuming in Australia is one of the best parts is, yeah, great coffee shops.
I 100% agree with you. Like the first thing I do when I come back to Australia is a coffee. It's like,
absolutely. I mean, I'm a bit of a sleuth. I can find pretty good coffee no matter where I go, but it does take a fair bit of trial and error and a lot of research. But no, I think the other thing is in Australia, there's a little bit more of especially in surgery, the kind of 2-tiered referral system. I think a lot more GPs or membership trained vets are doing more surgery. And in North America, at least in the cities that I've worked in, many more GPs will refer those same sorts of procedures, which for me as someone who loves soft tissue, you know, send me all your soft tissue things. That's great.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying your general GP clinic in the States and in Canada will do fewer of the fun surgeries?
Well, it depends what you define as fun surgeries. But yeah, like it's not uncommon for me as a specialist to be referred a cystotomy in where I've worked in North America, or, you know, gastrointestinal surgery, gallbladder mucosals, some of which can be, you know, some GI surgery, some gallbladder mucosals are hard, you know, and they do require a certain level of post-op care and things. But I think, that's one difference that I noticed. And then in Ohio, I mean, people bring you food all the time. I mean, it's amazing. The cookies, so good there. Like we had at Ohio State, we were kind of renowned as a surgery residents. We kind of troll the hospital looking for who brought the cookies that day. And we'd kind of,
I love it.
They're in GP today. And you go around and find them. But no, I had a client once, she dropped her pet off for some x-rays and me and the student had seen her and she came back with a whole cheesecake because she said we looked hungry. Thought it was great.
Don't eat my dog. Please don't eat my dog.
But yeah.
This makes decision making very hard. I'm trying to put myself back in my 25-year-old self going, okay, would I reconsider things? So from what you're talking about initially, I thought, yeah, maybe I should have looked at America. And then you said about the coffee, and I'm like, okay, no, good decision. America's out. But now you're talking about cookies. And I'm like, maybe it is worth it.
I think the good news is that Australian coffee or Australian New Zealand coffee culture is really taking off now in the US and Canada. It's becoming like a real boutique thing. So if you Google, you look at like the website and the decor and the way they do their flat whites, you can kind of work out where the good ones are.
Okay,
so,
cool. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is possible.
Yeah.
I was like 5 years ago, the first time I went to the States and went through and I was like, this black stuff poured out and it's like, they have this stuff all the time in movies. Got to try some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if it was burnt. I didn't know if it was burnt.
You're right.
I thought it was like pot burnt. Like, so someone's trying to clean a dirty like charcoal pot and then use that as coffee, because I was just like, what is this stuff? And it's everywhere. Oh, would you like some more? I'm like, no, thank you. Oh, would you like some cream with that? Oh, okay, I'll try cream. Oh, it's even worse.
Yeah, I think as a surgery resident, you couldn't be too picky about the coffee. Yeah. Coffee was coffee. It was. Yeah. It's always good.
So, Bronwyn, you got me all excited about being a surgeon now. It's never been anything that I was particularly interested in, but you make it sound really nice. What are the downsides? What? There's clearly a lot of very cool stuff about it, but there's got to be a downside.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and I love being a surgeon, and for me it's worked out really well. But I think there's some definite downsides that I think maybe you don't think about when you first think about being a surgeon. So one of the things I think to consider when you're charting your journey through your vet career is, are you okay with being on call? And in the sense of being a surgeon, are you okay with forever being on call? Pretty much. I mean, it's maybe not forever. There's certain places where you don't need to be on call, but part of the job as a surgeon is some expectation usually that you'll be on call. And At first, you think, oh, it's not so bad. Everyone's on call when they first start vet. But as you progress in your career, many other specialties or types of veterinarians can get out of it. And if you're a lucky surgeon, you can get out of it. But I think understanding that that's going to be part of your job. And then I think the other thing is that it's it's a tough specialty, because when you make a mistake, it's exposed to the world. It's there for all to view, and complications are just the worst, and they happen to everybody, and they can be really sort of soul destroying. And I think as a surgeon, if you make a mistake, your mistake is going to walk up the hall of the hospital and everyone's going to stare at it.
Yeah.
I think, your complications are right out there for people to see, and you need to make those split-second decisions sometimes on the spot. You don't always get it's not like internal medicine where if you choose the wrong diagnostic test, you can kind of just do the right one tomorrow, and no one's the wiser.
I totally see that. I actually, if I say I was never that drawn to surgery, I actually like doing surgery.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy the process, but that was actually my big thing. I worry about, always used to especially, about the case afterwards a lot. What you go over in your head, did I do that right? Did I do that properly? And is it going to be okay? And I only fully relax a week after the surgery when everything seems to be going well. How do you deal with that? What's your mental armor against those soul-destroying thought processes and worrying about your cases too much?
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty about worrying about my cases too much. I think it's just part of my personality, and I think if you're going to be a successful surgeon, you need to get that under control pretty early in your career. And so, I guess my tactics are to sort of try and do the absolute best that I can in the OR and feel comfortable when I'm closing that I've done everything that I can. And then if I'm sort of struggling to sleep at night because I'm worried about my patient, I try and think to myself, is there anything that I could do now that could make things better? And usually there's not. So usually it means that, you go in there the next morning and 9 times out of 10, the thing that you've been most worried about hasn't actually happened yet. So trying not to worry about the stuff that hasn't happened yet. And then I found that when something does go wrong, when there is a complication, oftentimes dealing with the complication is not as bad as the angst and worry that led up to it. Because, there's a complication, I know how to deal with those things. That's what I got trained for in my residency. So if something does happen, which, fortunately doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it's like, okay, we have a plan. This is what we're going to do. And, most of the time they're not life and death complications. Most of the time they're frustrating and, potentially expensive, but not, I think it's just something that comes, it gets easier with time, but certainly I'm someone who, initially, even as a specialist, would worry a lot about my patients.
It's good to know that I was going to say it's good to know that the specialists worry as well, but you'd probably worry more because there's even more. You're not supposed to be the one who messes up. As a GP vet, if I make a mistake, go, oh, yeah, well, I'm not a surgeon, but for you, it's almost harder. What you said there reminds me of it's supposed to be a Mark Twain quote that says, "If I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened." Mm-hmm. That's exactly that. You couldn't worry so much about it, and then you've wasted all that emotional energy worrying about something that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think the hardest ones are when you've kind of had a moment in surgery where you think, oh, especially, some of the more challenging, soft tissue cases where you're dissecting out a tumor and there's all kinds of important structures around and there's lots of things that are large and white, and that you're not supposed to hit the really important one, but some of them have to be sacrificed. And then you're not going to know whether the thing that you cut was the important structure necessarily until the next day when the patient's either, doing well or not. And I think, most of the time the patient the next day gets up and walks around and it's all, it's all fine, but definitely it can cause some angst.
Yeah, there's an exercise I've heard of before. Well, it's the worst case scenario exercise, mm-hmm. where we're tempted to, when trying to deal with these things mentally and emotionally, there's a temptation to go, look, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. But then you can't convince yourself, well, this is me at least. There's a voice in your head that says, yeah, but is it going to be fine? Is it really going to be fine? Because what if it's not? So sometimes it's actually good to, I find if I'm stuck in those sort of negative thought processes, to go All right, let's look at what's going to happen if it's not fine. Let's picture that. Let's actually go through the worst case scenario. So let's say I go in there tomorrow, and as exactly what you said, you go and you go, okay, it has gone wrong. I've done an enterectomy. It's dehisced. It's got a septic peritonitis. So what am I going to do? I have a plan. I know what I'm going to do. There's a follow-up. So then your mind can go, okay, cool. I'm going to stop worrying about it so much because I have a plan. What is going to happen? If it doesn't go right, now I can stop worrying about it, and it's probably going to be fine. But if it's not, then I have my next actions in place. I know exactly what to do.
I definitely do that. I definitely think of the worst case scenario, and most of the time there is a way to deal with that, even though it's, you know, frustrating or embarrassing or costly or all three. But there's always a way. There's usually a way to, you know, to get around it. And yeah, I think all I can say is that it gets, your attitude towards it gets easier with time. But I think the more you've been doing surgery, the harder the surgeries that you do. And so there's always going to be ones where it's like, oh, I've actually never done this before. Or I've only done it once and I'm really quite nervous about it. I hope it goes okay. And then you've got to rely on, you know, sort of trust yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Did you find that your expectations, and then also the expectations that you set to the client, changes as you get better? Because when you're new to surgery or medicine or anything like that, you might think, oh look, when I do this, I have to fix it, and the owner believes that I sort of guarantee the owner that we're going to fix it and there's not going to be any problems. So that then when there's a complication, it is a big stress because the expectations were wrong. Have you learned over time to go, you know, the expectation is not always a guaranteed fix, and you communicate that well from the start so that everybody's expectations are within reason. So when things go wrong, nobody's that upset because that was half expected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I certainly like to have a long conversation with every client before I take their pet to surgery. And I think most surgeons are the same. You know, even if somebody else has already diagnosed the problem and you're just doing the surgery, it's always important to kind of have that conversation as the surgeon, because you're the one that's going to have to deal with things if they don't go as planned. So it's good to have had that conversation beforehand. And you know, I do try and make it fairly positive. I talk about, you know, the likelihood is that this is all, you know, we're going to be able to fix your pet or improve your pet or whatever. But I think having some literature behind you and some numbers and an understanding of how these things work, so you can tell them, look, you know, the incidence of aspiration pneumonia after laryngeal paralysis surgery is around 15%. So, you know,
yeah. So
if your dog gets aspiration pneumonia, that might be life-threatening, and that's something that we need to be okay with going into this. And then if the dog gets aspiration pneumonia, it's you know, really frustrating, and maybe it's life-threatening, but you know, you've had that conversation, and so you know, people are sort of, hopefully, if they've understood, then at least you've kind of communicated that, and they can make their own decision about whether they accept those risks or not. Yeah.
Strange times that we're in.
Yes.
How's your day-to-day life, working life, been affected through the whole COVID crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said at the start that you know, envied my lifestyle, and I think what I've discovered recently is that being a locum who travels on an airplane for their livelihood is kind of a tenuous occupation to have during a pandemic. So,
Jeez, yeah.
so I've had to do a fair bit of rethinking recently, and I think I'm trying to learn to embrace uncertainty, like I think we all are, and that's, you know, one of the reasons why I'm looking more into, you know, how can I make an impact more through education and online learning, and how can I, you know, get skills out there that people are going to be able to use, you know, in the community in surgery. And then also thinking, you know, in the short to medium term, international locuming is just not a thing right now. You know, it's not something that's feasible with these 2-week quarantine periods. And so, yeah, it'll be an interesting few months, and I guess I'm excited to see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen yet, but yeah, maybe some changes coming soon.
Well, there certainly are changes coming. I was going to ask you what changes for you or changes for everybody. There's certainly a lot of changes for everybody. What are you most excited about? What are you thinking will come out of this for Bronwyn that really excites you?
I think it'll be a chance to finally look more closely at the online and telemedicine and online learning side of things. I mean, I've met and become into contact with so many people during this pandemic that I never would have had a chance to come into contact with. And some of that's through social media and even you guys. Like, I never would have reached out to Gerardo or any of that had it not been for the pandemic. And I think one thing about surgery is that it's not a specialty that lends itself well to remote work. Another key downside of surgery. But I think there's been some pretty ingenious people out there who are starting to create, how can we actually use the technology that we have at least to teach surgery or to help people with surgery. If we're not treating the physical patients, but we can still use our expertise, to do that. So kind of branching out in my career into a little bit of that as well as clinical surgery. And I think, I'm fortunate to still have some work here close to home. So I'm not,
cool. Not unemployed.
Not unemployed, but still, still looking at options for sure.
The Gerardo said earlier about your charity work and the stuff you're doing not in specialist centers. Tell us more about that.
So I haven't done a lot of charity work. I would like to do more. I was scheduled to do some more this year, but obviously COVID has put a little bit of a stop to that. But I've worked with 2 different overseas charities who run pretty similarly. There's one called World Vets, which runs out of Central and South America. And they do a few different things. They kind of have community population control programs, and they have training centers where they help to train local vets in how to do spays and neuters, because they don't get a lot of surgery training, I think, sometimes. And they also have programs where they allow veterinary students from North America to come for a 2-week rotation. And the veterinary students do the spay and neuter under the direction of instructors. And so the students learn, really good spay neuter skills over the week. The pets get neutered or spayed for free. And the tuition that the students pay for the program kind of helps to fund the program. Yeah. So I volunteered for a couple of those programs as an instructor, which I thought was great because I love teaching. So I like surgery too, but in terms of spay and neuter, I'd much rather teach spay and neuter than be the one doing the spay and neuter, because I feel like it's way more valuable to, I can make a bigger impact by teaching a bunch of people how to do it than I can. There's a limit. It's like scalability, like you were talking about before. There's a limit to how much you can physically do yourself. And so there's a vet called Dr. Steve Krasinski, I may have mispronounced his last name, who works for World Vet Central America. He's kind of the veterinary officer. And so he lives down there and does a lot of great work with, surgical education for vet students and things. So that's been great. And then the other kind of cool trip that I had a chance to go on was up to the Northwest Territories of Canada. So the University of Calgary sends a group of veterinary students in 4th year and some faculty up to communities, really, really remote communities up in the Northwest Territories. And these communities are accessible only by plane in the summer because the ground up there is very marshy and swampy. But in the wintertime, they're accessible by road because everything freezes. And so they create these ice roads. So you drive, across frozen lakes and across sort of frozen marshes, and you're able to access by road. And so the team puts together a vet clinic in these trucks, and we drive them from Yellowknife or up from Norman Wells, up into, the far north. And that was very cool.
So you're going up in the winter when everything's frozen.
Yeah, in February.
Community work still, yeah?
Yeah, so we end up setting up vet clinics in school classrooms, which is which is pretty crazy. So we had, grade 5, and then the students come in and watch. So you've got grade 5 class, and they've got to stand behind a particular line of tape on the side of the room. They're all like, "Wow, this is so cool!" So it's pretty neat for the students, the school students, as well as the vet students who are up there kind of learning spay and neuter. So I helped out as an instructor with that too. So that was kind of, again, just a really neat experience. You have to be quite resourceful. Cool. You have to deal with, problems with your generator or your truck breaking down in -40 or not having any lights or all kinds of stuff like that.
Wow. That sounds incredible. I love that.
It was very cool, really, really fun. If you ever have the chance to visit the far, far north, the Arctic, essentially. I was just below the Arctic Circle, but essentially the Arctic. I'd never experienced anything like it. It was really neat.
Gerardo, when are we going?
Lombok sounds better, mate.
But yeah, I wanted to. I heard that you guys go to, or at least you, Hubert, go to Indonesia.
Yeah.
Kind of a similar thing.
It's a similar thing. There's a big program, or there's a few programs that run in Bali. Lombok, on the other hand, which is just next door to Bali, has a bad stray dog problem that the government really does want to address. It actually negatively influenced some of the tourism. So I was trying to. There are some people who work there, but there's no big programs really. There's a couple of expats who've set up some spay clinics and try to fund it privately, but I am in the process, or I was in the process of getting involved in that. But same thing, COVID sort of put the brakes on. I actually this week I started thinking again about, do I start trying to dig again? There's a few limitations with that I'm trying to overcome for being able to do vet work there legally as a non-Indonesian resident. I haven't quite found a solution for that yet. I think I have, but I'm not 100% sure. The bureaucracy there is clear as mud. It's very hard to get to the actual fact of anything, what's legal and what's not legal. But I'm sitting here listening to you going, it's a surgical instructor who likes to travel. I'm gonna
keep me in mind for sure.
100%.
Can we just dive a bit deeper now into volunteering? You said, why did you actually do it? Why did you actually choose to do volunteering?
So I think as veterinarians who have trained in any sort of developed country where we've got veterinary medicine that is at a high enough level to rival human medicine, we're so lucky to get trained in all these skills. And there's many parts of the world where veterinarians don't really get much surgical training, particularly, but don't have the opportunity to train the way that we have. And in those parts of the world also, may rely a lot more heavily on animals for their livelihood and may have a lot more animals that they interact with on a daily basis. And so two things. One of them is, training other veterinarians on how to better manage both animal health and welfare, but also it feeds back into public health. So you get to really have more of an impact in, one health or global health.
Mm-hmm.
And two, just kind of giving back some of the skills that, we've been fortunate enough to learn in Australia or the US, giving them back to communities where, in some of the places that I've worked, the human hospital didn't even have an X-ray machine. So, the fact that we have digital X-ray available to our veterinary patients is really, a huge privilege. So
it gives you a bit of perspective, doesn't it?
I think perspective is the key word. Yeah. And I think it also teaches you to be, adaptable and resourceful and make the best with what you've got, but also make decisions based on what's feasible within the constructs of what's there. So, certain surgeries we just can't do in those locations. It's not feasible for animal welfare reasons. We just don't have the capability. And so making those decisions and being like, no, sorry, we can't, but we can do, these other things that might really help. So,
yeah. So when you say you're teaching people the surgical skills, are these local vets or vet students as well, and then do you get American or international people come along on the program and practice their surgical skills there?
Yeah, so the two programs that I volunteered in, the Worldwide Vet Service in Thailand and the World Vets in Nicaragua, it was a combination. So the specific program that I was teaching was students from either Australia or the US who were coming in to learn surgery. But then the people working in the clinic, day to day, the regular veterinary staff were local veterinarians and local veterinary nurses. And so those people were doing almost like an internship, learning in the clinic from us and learning along with the vet students. And then I think there's other times of year when they don't have international students come in, where the instructors from the charity teach the local veterinarians kind of the same thing. But because I don't speak Spanish or Thai, I'm not as useful to the local veterinarians, obviously, although I can help in some way. The language becomes a challenge. But definitely there were some veterinarians, particularly in the Thailand program, who did speak, good English, and they were really keen to learn how we did things differently, and they were really interested in surgery. And so we did like a limb amputation one day, and a couple of them scrubbed in, and we talked through the whole thing, and it was great. They were like, oh, this is so useful. We often need to amputate dog limbs, and so now we actually know how to do it in a way that's safe within the construct of what we've got. So
let's wrap up with a couple of standard questions, Bronwyn. Are you a podcast listener?
I am. Yeah. So I travel a lot and I drive a lot for work.
Okay.
And I drive a lot for fun too. Lots of long road trips to the mountains. And so my favorite podcast is Hidden Brain from NPR. Has a marvelous host whose name is Shankar Vedantam, whose voice I could just listen to all day. And it's a really interesting podcast based on psychology. So kind of teaching us why we think the way we think and going through different human behavior, interesting quirks of human behavior. And then they get a psychologist on there and talk about, why we do what we do. So I think that's really interesting. And I also like the other one from NPR that I enjoy is Planet Money, because I, like many veterinarians, have zero background in economics, finance, business. And so it just explains things in a really interesting way. But I think, if you haven't already checked out Hidden Brain, I'd give it a listen.
All right. And then our last question that we always wrap up with. You're at a conference, or let's say you're doing a digital event where you are talking to all of the veterinary new graduates in the world. And you have just a couple of minutes to give them one message, the one thing that Bronwyn wants to tell the vets of the world.
I had so many messages. This was a tricky question. But I think ultimately, believe in yourself. Don't let what you do be defined by other people's expectations, what other people tell you that you should do or that you feel like you should do. And, find out what it is that makes you have a great day, in vet med, and try and do more of that. So, and even if that means switching up what you're doing to something completely different after a couple of years or changing, don't be afraid to do something a little bit, off the beaten path or not do things the traditional way. I've certainly taken, some people would say I've done everything the hard way. So, but I think it's, everyone has their own kind of journey. And the other thing that I feel pretty strongly about is, creating a life for yourself outside of work that gives you a reason to leave the clinic every day. So, don't forget to find, meaning and joy in things outside of work. And you guys have done a lot of talking about work-life balance and whether that's the right term for it or not. But I think, finding some things in your life that you have passion for, that you love to do, that, when it's 6 p.m. and you're trying to get your medical records done, if you have something going on that you want to get out of that clinic, you're going to be so much more efficient. You're going to have so much better time at work if you've got other stuff going on that, that balances it out. Yeah.
Well, you certainly seem to have smashed it. You seem to have figured it out to a very large degree. I love looking through your Instagram feed and photos of running in the mountains and hiking, but then also having that exceptional career. I've talked about it before, where I feel like it can be easy to lead too far towards the balance part and actually neglect the work part a little bit because I'm so focused on having all the fun and doing all the great things. And I love how you've managed to really become exceptional at your work, and then also have this really, at least from the outside, really incredible looking balanced part of your life as well.
I think it's an ongoing struggle for everybody. So I'm certainly trying, and but I don't think anyone has it quite.
It's a journey. Isn't it?
It's a journey for sure. Yeah.
Bronwyn, that was incredible. You've completely changed my perception on what it means to be a surgeon, on what it means to be in America. A little part of me wishes I could go back in time and live your life. That's incredible. Thank you so much for the time spending with us, and I think you've inspired quite a few people to think a little bit differently about where they're going with their careers.
No, thank you too. And like that little golden nugget for me, which was the choosing to be a resident, that was, I'm never going to do it, but I thought that was actually beautiful. So thank you so much as well.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been really fun. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. Remember to go and check out the show notes at thevetvault.com for a summary of some of the best bits from the episodes and our guests' favorite resources. If you found value in this and you can think of a friend or a colleague who could benefit from the content, then please do them a favor and share this episode with them.